Dr. Russell Blaylock, who's a neurosurgeon, is putting the link together between high fructose corn syrup, which is an excitotoxin, and monosodium glutamate, which affects the brain. And it actually destroys brain cells, and as it destroys brain cells, then moods change. And I was wondering if you would give a comment, if you have heard anything about these excitotoxins, as he calls them, which literally excite the brain cells to death, and how that can change moods, whereby a child would have to be put on something like, say, Ritalin to calm them down and to change their mood, and they go from there. Because these evil people, they need some kind of way to introduce this Ritalin and all these other mood-altering drugs into the system, into the society, and the best way to do it is to contaminate our foods with excitotoxins.
Okay, John, what's your comments and answer?
Well, that's a great comment, and part of it speaks for itself, obviously in the sense that, the high fructose corn syrup and other non-nutritious substances, that tend to derange the body and mind, and fortunately a lot of us are learning about that. Unfortunately, the products are continuing to be mass-marketed more and more and more, and more people are becoming susceptible to that. So that's one piece by itself, is just the need to educate ourselves about that, and then to do what we can to get organic and safer natural foods, and to protect our children in that way. The other part, related to this idea of negative synergy, is that whether a child is labeled ADHD and then quote unquote treated because of somebody's judgment, and sometimes that's nutritional and related to excitotoxins or brain allergies or other, food derangements, it can be for many other reasons, but whatever reason, the other thing, and this is where the negative synergy comes in, is that the drugs themselves, the treatment, called the stimulant drugs, called the SSRI antidepressants, called these different classes of drugs, Ritalin, Adderall for the stimulants, Paxil, Prozac, Effexor, Celexa, Remeron, these classes of drugs, they all induce what Peter Breggin calls in his new book titled Medication Madness. They all induce a form of medical intoxication. Just like someone who's taken alcohol and is going to drive home from the party, and I can drive, whatever, and the friend doesn't let him drive. They take the keys, and because that person is impaired, but they're not aware that they're impaired. These psychiatric drugs have the same effect, and medication madness or medical intoxication refers to the fact that these drugs derange thought and emotion, and sometimes extreme, to where people go off and commit suicide or kill themselves, oftentimes where they're just more impulsive and will go off and rob a convenience store or whatever, when that's something they would never do. And so they end up in jail or in trouble or with driving under the influence citations or whatever. And a lot of the time, it's an effect of the drug. So if they're already deranged, as you're saying, Larry, because of physiological problems, and then they're further deranged by the drugs, it's even worse.
It's a bad
Okay, we've got another question from our studio audience here. And Jan, what's your question?
Well, I just had some prior experience with my eldest daughter, and I don't want to go into too much explanation about it, except for she was, I had thought she was having, I was told by numerous allergists that she didn't have allergies, but that her problems were psychiatric in nature. And I refused to accept that from her because I knew what she was like as an infant and as a young toddler, but I knew that her behaviors were becoming bizarre. She would have just rages and huge, uncontrollable tantrums, but not over anything that could be identified. The tantrum wouldn't have an issue behind it. It would just be, she would growl going down the hall, and you knew that, in a moment she's going to start pulling her hair out, and there's just no knowing what it was due to, or no preventing it. There was no satisfaction for her. So it wasn't about whatever was going on. And this was becoming daily, and sometimes numerous times a day, and I was unable to track it until she went to a friend's house, who, when I'd never left her with other people before, but this particular friend was a therapist. And when my daughter was there, while there, my daughter had gone into one of these rages and then crawled under her bed, to the far end of the bed, and was hiding like a scared animal. And that was a pretty bizarre behavior that she had seen. I was familiar with this with my daughter. She gave me a book about allergic tension fatigue syndrome by Dr. Doris Rapp. It's R-A-P-P. And it talked about clinical ecologists who I think there's a different name for them now. This was like 25 years ago. And it was a different way of approaching nutrition and health. So I found one in Texas, in Houston. I'm in Austin now, but I had to drive several hours, several times a week to have her tested. And while being tested, I saw her reactions on the spot. The hardest part is her behaviors were, I kept her out of school. I homeschooled her the first a couple of years because her behavior was so bizarre that she would lose she would be like a mental dullard. And I didn't want her to be labeled in school. I mean, she wouldn't know her color names. She wouldn't know, some days she knew extensive names. In that 64 color pack, she could name every single one of them easily and request the one she wanted. And other days she couldn't separate red and green. She'd be calling them by the wrong names. And that really scared me to put her in a school behaving that way. That and the tantrums and rages she'd go into. I was afraid she'd be pulled aside and considered emotionally disturbed.
John, have you had experience in this area?
Well,
yeah.
Yes, but not nearly so much as Jan. And so what Jan says speaks for itself as far as, the recommendation of Doris Rapp's work and the fact that this kind of thing can happen. The part that I would comment on is that psychiatry, I talk about it, psychiatry as a magic trick. It acts as a magic trick. You have a child that's judged as a problem in whatever way, and then you explain it as a mental illness, ADHD or chemical imbalance or whatever. And the magic trick is that, voila, everybody's absolved from responsibility to think any further because it's explained, problem, reaction, solution. Oh, that's the cause, just this biological or genetic defect in the child, that this mental illness, and the treatment is a drug. Jan resisted that immediately and kept investigating. And sometimes it's hard to figure out, but whether it's physiological, or whether it's emotional or whether it's relational, there's many causes for children's upsets, But the point is that you keep looking, you keep thinking, you refuse to label and stigmatize and drug your child. That's where the information that I put out can be helpful. And then you got to keep looking and searching and reaching and trying to figure out what is the unique situation of your child. There's many reasons that a child can be upset and tantrum and melt down and crawl under a bed. Obviously, they could do it because they're emotionally upset. They can do it because they're having a blood sugar crash from too many donuts. They can do it because they lost their toy. They can do it because they're afraid of what they're going to do tomorrow. They can do it because they haven't seen their father in a month and they're upset about that. Or they can do it because they're having a brain allergy reaction to foods, that are toxic for them, You got to figure it out. You got to keep looking and keep working. Never give up, and trust that your child will.
Well, that's what love is about, and the parents can only administer that better than the state. The state doesn't love us; our parents do.
All right, Jan. So tell us about Paul Harvey. The rest of the story. What happened?
She is the most incredibly intelligent and calm and wise person as an adult. About 6 months after I put her on a very strict rotation diversified diet, and you can find some information about that on the web. But we did the strict version, a different food group, food family each day. For 7 days a week. You couldn't repeat any one grain more often than once a week. It gets pretty difficult to stick to, but it was worth it. And within about 6 months after putting her on a strict rotation diversified diet, she was a whole different person. She went through school in the gifted and talented programs. She is calm and level-headed. She knows that there are some foods that still affect her. For instance, she does not eat grapes unless she's going to be by herself.
Okay, we've come to the end of the program. Thank you very much.
Hallelujah.
Okay. John Breedy, thank you for being with us this evening. We certainly appreciate everything and all the fine work you've done in the past and what you're going to do in the future. We know it's going to continue. So thank you very much for being with us.
And just so people know, books are available at Brave New Books.
And his website's wilddiscoast.com.